Be sure to subscribe for your chance to win a custom leather playmat when we hit 2,500 subscribers. We are back with the final cards for Zendikar Rising. We've actually got the pre-release kits and booster boxes in the background as we jump in with the Kiri Featherless, or Fearless, Fearless Voyager. 1, a red, and a white for a 3/3. Now, you're going to notice with these gold cards, they're going to usually feel pretty pushed for their mana cost, and that is because in a sealed deck, pre-release weekend, getting both colors can be a bit of a difficult ask, especially if you're in 3 color. So, like, in a 2-color deck, these are much, much better. 3-color, it starts to become more of an issue. When you're missing out on one of those colors, this card's dead in your hand, so usually you're going to get more of an upside with them, which is more enticing to play them for sure. Whenever you attack a player with 1 or more equipped creatures, you draw a card, and you can pay a white to unattach an equipment from a creature you control. If you do, tap that creature and it gains indestructible until end of turn. That is a super dangerous card with equipment. The ability to just save your creature from removal, to have it win in combat. I mean, it is just a mess. And attacking with a equipped creature to draw a card is just brutal. So 1 or more creatures, so you're not going to draw multiple cards per combat, but 1 is enough, guys. If you're outdrawing your opponent 2-1, you should be winning that game. Brushfire Elemental, a green and a red for a 1/1 with haste. Can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less, and whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, it gets +2/+2 until end of turn. I mean, there's a lot of upside here, but without fetch lands in the set, I don't know that this is going to be particularly good. I don't know that this is worth the red and green. I mean, if you're in red and green, maybe you still play it. It's got the quasi-evasion, which is nice. Yeah, I don't know. Just going through everything, we didn't have a whole lot of like Harrow effects where you're getting like double landfalls out of nowhere. So this guy pretty much is just going to be a 3/3 that can't be blocked with creatures 2 or less for most of the game. I mean, he's fine. He is fine. He's not going to work out all the time, though. He's got an upside with an actual trade-off, so that is not the most exciting card for me. I'd probably sleeve it up if I was in red and green, and I would regret it sometimes, and it would also be just like really good some of the other times. Cleric of Life's Bond, a black and a white for a 2/2. When another cleric enters the battlefield under your control, you gain a life. And when you gain life for the first time each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on it. This guy can get out of hand pretty quickly, and I probably like that more than the previous card. There's plenty of little incidental life gain that can make this guy into a 3/3 for 2, and then if you get any more value than that, that's really out of hand. I mean, 3 power creatures for 2, solid. The bigger the backside, the better. But like once you start getting to like 4 or more power at 2, that can really end games in a hurry. Grakmaw Skyclave Ravager. That is a mouthful, and actually multiple mouthfuls here, as this Hydra for 3 mana enters the battlefield with 3 +1/+1 counters, and whenever another creature you control dies, if it had a +1/+1 counter, this guy gets bigger, and when he dies, you get an XX black and green Hydra, where X is the number of +1/+1 counters on it. Kind of a modular style effect that you don't even need another body for. So this one I think is incredibly good and well worth the 3 mana investment. You're going to be happy to have that guy, and may be the type of card that kind of encourages you in your color choice for your pre-release pool. Kargan War Leader. I don't understand that art. 1, a red and a white for a 3/3. Other warriors you control get +1/+1. That is really, really good. I mean, I would definitely be sleeving this one up. Red has a real strong preference for warriors, and this Lord at 3 mana is going to be extremely good. Casa Royal Chaser. For 2 mana, we've got a 1/2 flying haste that you can also use to tap and make the next instant or sorcery you spell. The next instant or sorcery spell you cast this turn with X in its cost, where X is the number of wizards you control, as this ability resolve. Oh, cost X less to cast. Sorry, I struggled with that one, guys. So your X spells are going to get a boost for wizards. Probably not something you can pull off in your pre-release pool. This is the type of card that I generally open in pre-releases and just rely on my uncommons to win instead, because this one is not going to be very good in Limited, but people will have fun with that in Commander. Linvala, Shield of Seagate, 1, a white and a blue for a 3/3 flyer. Very much on board here. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you have a full party, you can choose a non-land permanent an opponent controls, and that it can't attack, block, or use activated abilities. And you can sacrifice it to give hexproof or indestructible to all your creatures. Phenomenal card. This one, absolutely 5 out of 5 for your pre-release pool. This is an efficient flyer, so you have a creature with flying. That is also creature removal, potentially. Not likely, but possible. Like, you may end up with a full party. And then also the ability to sacrifice to save your other creatures. I think this is an absolutely tremendous card for Limited. Lull Mage Familiar, 3 casting, cost 2/4. You can tap for a green or a blue, and whenever you cast a kick spell, you can gain 2 life. I think this is very good. You're definitely playing it if you're in green and blue. And the nice little incidental life gain can add up over time. Again, you generally don't want to play cards that only give you life, but this type of thing is a welcome inclusion. Moss Pit Skeleton, a black and a green for a 2/2. Fine for starters, but if it was kicked, it enters the battlefield with 3 +1/+1 counters, so kind of efficiently costed at both ends there. You get a 2/2 for 2, which is fine. You can do better, but 2/2 for 2 is acceptable. And then 5 gets you a 5/5 for 5. Plus, whenever one or more +1/+1 counters are put on a creature you control, if he is in your graveyard, you can put him on top of your library, getting that recursion of the 5/5 for the late game. I like this guy a lot. You can trade him off early and then get him back, play him with kicker later. And I think that guy is very, very, what would you say? He's going to be a huge pain to play against. Marasa, Root Grazer. For 2 mana, we get a 2/3. That's pretty nice stats. Also has Vigilance, and is going to allow you to play basic lands from your hand onto the battlefield anytime you want by tapping it. You can also return a basic land you control to its owner's hand. I suspect this card is going to be very, very good in Limited, allowing for just reusable ETBs, or reusable landfall, I should say, and also potentially just getting in there, though you may actually be careful with this guy, as you may not want to risk him to combat tricks. A lot of the time, when you're ready to start sending stuff is going to be when you can actually have answers to their combat tricks, is when you're going to be more comfortable. Nahiri, Air of the Ancients. We've seen this, one of the first spoilers here. 2, a red and a white. Her +1 is creating a 1/1 white core creature token, and then you can attach an equipment you control to it. Her -2, to look at the top 6, you can put a warrior or equipment into your hand, and then her -3 is going to be dealing damage to target creature or planeswalker equal to twice the number of equipment you control. I mean, she's okay. She's all right. I mean, it's a draw engine, which is something. It makes creatures, which is something. The payoff I don't like as much as... I mean, I guess it's not fair to compare her to like an Elspeth, where you've got making a 1/1 each turn is definitely good. Like that is way better than it may seem. But the rest of this card doesn't really feel like it kind of stacks up compared to other Planeswalkers. Like, Planeswalkers are insane in Limited, just to be clear here. Like, Planeswalkers are very often like the best you can do. It used to be, creatures or creature removal, creatures, combat tricks, and then maybe mana fixing were kind of like your hierarchy of how good cards were. When Planeswalkers were printed, they pretty much jumped to the head of that list, because they often are things that interact with making creatures or killing creatures or just generating a constant advantage over the course of the game. It's almost like another player sitting down with you. So the +1 on this, probably better than it looks. and I'm suspecting the rest of the modes probably worse than they look. So overall, I'm not like super excited about this card for a pre-release pool. I would play it, but there's a lot of times where it's not going to work out. The equipment bouncing around is really going to depend on the quality of your equipment, and I suspect this card will be much better in draft than it will be in your sealed pool, as you'll have more control over getting equipment to go along with her. Nissa of Shadowed Boughs, 2 a black and a green. This again, actually, this was like a spoiler before spoiler season even started. We found out that we were going to be getting this Golgari Nissa with a landfall of putting a loyalty counter on Nissa. So every land is going to add counters to her. She also can add counters by untapping a land you control to have it become a 3/3 with haste and menace until end of turn. And then her -5, which I think is the thing that people were most interested with as soon as they saw her. You can put a creature card with a converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of lands you control onto the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. So I think Commander players are going to have a lot of fun with this. I think it's fine for your pre-release pool. Yeah, I don't know. The Planeswalkers in this set are not, at first glance, like they're not just like absolute destroyers, which is potentially fine. I mean, it's not like my fondest memories are like winning with or losing to Planeswalkers that are like legit unbeatable. I mean, like Elspeth, Sun's Champion was like that. Like, you could literally sleeve up her with like 39 Pokemon cards and you'd still win. Or like 39 planes. Like, you were actually just fine if you had her in your deck. And the original Elspeth as well was similarly just pretty much unbeatable. So I'm not arguing for unbeatable Planeswalkers. Omnath, Locus of Creation, adding another color. He's up to 4. When he enters the battlefield, you get to draw a card, and the landfall is crazy. If it's the first land you've played, you gain 4 life. If it's the second time, you get his mana cost back. And if it's the third time, it does 4 damage to each opponent and each Planeswalker you don't control. Yeah. That's a magic card right there. It's a big ask for the mana cost. I mean, that is not going to be easy in pre-release. Good luck to you if you sleeve this card up. May you cast it on turn 4 naturally every game. But there's a lot of times where you're just going to be missing one of those mana and it's just going to sit stranded in your hand. But, I mean, I think this card's going to be something people enjoy playing in Commander. And it's fun to see this continuation of Omnath. I'm just looking forward to what happens when the black shows up. I don't know if... I mean, my guess is... like long-term spoiler, how about we have Mirrodin besiege, like the Phyrexians from there invade Zendikar with black mana, and then that contaminates Omnath? That's my wild conspiracy theory about the next level that they could do with him. Oran, Skyclave, Hierophant, 2 a white and a black for a 3/3 lifelink. Whenever he or another cleric you control dies, target cleric with lesser converted mana cost gets to come back from your graveyard to the battlefield. And this guy's solid. I mean, lifelink is, again, like the type of life gain that actually matters, in that you're not just committed to just the life gain part of the card. This is recurring, so this could gain, 30 life over the course of a game. And that is definitely a card to contend with. Phylath, World Sculptor, 4 a red and a green for a 5/5. When it enters the battlefield, create a 0/1 plant token for each basic land you control. So the same landfall as Avenger of Zendikar. The same ETB as Avenger of Zendikar, but the landfall here is instead going to build up those plant tokens one at a time. More of a mentor role or a tutor role instead of a classroom teacher, so to speak. I mean, it's just focused in on that one plant, turning them into a 4/5 compared to the whole team getting bigger, which I suspect this probably won't be as good as Avenger of Zendikar, but maybe it will be. I don't know. Let me know which one you think is better. This one's a little tough to evaluate the trade-off, but luckily you don't have to choose between the two. You're only getting this one in Zendikar Rising, and he's going to be more than welcome in your red and green deck. Ravager's Mace. We've got this 3 mana equipment, giving it +1/+0 for each creature in your party. So potentially in Christmas Land, it's getting +4, +0, and Menace. And, you know, it's not one of the cheaper equipments, but that is a strong upside. Soaring Thought Thief, 2 mana for a 1/3 flyer with flash. As long as the opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard, then he's going to be a 2-power creature. And whenever one or more rogues you control attack, each opponent mills 2 cards. Yeah, I got to sign off on this one. This seems fine. It's a valid win condition on its own, and eventually it's very likely if he sticks around, he's going to be 2 power, so you'll probably end up like winning with damage and not the milling, but he'll at least make the damage happen. He's probably fine. Probably a little worse than he looks, but like in multiples in draft, he's actually going to be probably very good. If you can get like multiple of these milling 4 per turn, that actually ends the game pretty fast. Spoils of Adventure. The party is going to make this cost less. So Christmas Land, we've got a white and a blue to gain 3 and draw 3, which would be absolutely solid as hell when it works out. Umara Mystic, 1, a red and a blue for a flying 1-power creature. Whenever you cast an instant sorcery or a wizard, it gets +2/+0 until end of turn. So potentially a 3-power flyer on each turn if you have enough instants and sorceries and wizards to support this, but that is actually pretty difficult, so I think this one's probably a little worse than it may look, and you're going to have games where it's just swinging for 1 each turn. So that one's going to be easier to use in Constructed, but for Constructed, you're probably not going to care about it. Like, you can get more efficient creatures there, so that one probably stranded in no man's land. Though it's +2/+0 for each instant, so I guess in Limited, you're going to be looking at playing like 1 or 2 spells at most, whereas in Constructed, maybe you figure out some way to cast like a ton of instants and sorceries and pump this guy like crazy, but there are better options to take advantage of those instants and sorceries. Verolaz, the Split Current, a green, a blue, and X, enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter for each mana spent to cast it, so traditional Hydra fare, and whenever you cast a kick spell, you can remove 2 +1/+1 counters from him if you do copy that spell. So very interesting card. I suspect that people will really enjoy this in Commander, and it's totally fine for your pre-release pool, I suspect. I mean, not amazing, but it's fine. Is it fine? I mean, 5 mana for a 3/3, 4 mana for a 2/2. Yeah, I guess this guy's actually not that great for your pre-release pool. Yeah, he's a mana sink, but like, you're going to end up paying like 6 mana for a 4/4. I don't know. It really depends on the quality of your kicked cards, but like removing 2 counters from him is not nothing. So, yeah, I don't know. This guy, I kind of, in real time, bailed on this card. I'm not actually excited about him. Yasharn, Implacable Earth, a 4/4 for 4. You can search your library for a forest and a plains, basic forest and plains. Put them into your hand and shuffle your library, and players can't pay life or sacrifice non-land permanents to cast spells or activate abilities. This guy, I think, is very solid. You're going to be totally happy to sleeve him up. Gives you those extra landfall triggers, and I think this guy, way better than the last card. I mean, this guy is actually going to be a 4/4 for only 4, and he's going to get you extra lands, the card advantage there, and for Constructed, that last line is actually a little bit of a pain, stopping things like Force of Will and anything that requires sacrificing. And the last gold card here before we get into artifacts and lands, Zagras, Thief of Heartbeats. He's going to cost 1 less for each creature in your party, so Christmas Land, black and a red for a 4/4 flying Death Touch haste is phenomenal. Giving all your other creatures Death Touch is very, very strong. And whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a planeswalker, destroy that planeswalker. That part probably not going to be as relevant, but man, the rest of that text is just the stuff of nightmares, making all of your things just a disaster to block, and being a hasty flyer. I mean, this guy is incredibly good and could easily get me going black-red if I open him in my pre-release pool. Oh, I was wrong. There's one more gold card. Zareth Sand, the Trickster, 3, a black and a blue for a 4/4 with flash, which I love. The surprise block elements also keeping your mana open for the end step, potentially showing removal. And then you can pay 2, a black and a blue a blue to return an unblocked attacking rogue you control to put him from your hand onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. So like ninjutsu without ninjutsu. And whenever he deals combat damage to a player, you may put target permanent card from that player's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. So just brutal. Like, he can flash in as an attacker, get massive card advantage, stealing their creatures back from their graveyard, or he can be a surprise blocker. This guy, again, like, he could be a reason why I end up going black-blue, or maybe even go 3 colors to support a splash of him, because that is a very, very brutal effect. Cliffhaven Kitesail, 1 casting cost equipment, going to give a creature wings, and can equip for 2. This is actually one of the more reusable pieces of equipment and is very dangerous historically in decks like green, where you can have really big fatties that don't have anything special going on except for that girth, where you can send them up in the air and just wreak havoc. A lot of the flyers are going to be 2/2s, 3/3s. Some of the better ones are 4/4s. None of them are going to stack up versus the biggest stuff that green has to offer. That's going to make it very difficult to deal with, and can also be passed back and forth. So you can potentially take a 5/5, send it up there, turn it sideways, and then pass this off to another creature, which can then prevent your opponent from making reasonable attacks with their smaller flyers. Forsaken Monument has a lot of people very excited. This card feels like it's made for those colorless commander decks. We'll see how it is for the rest of constructed Magic, but for now, I think Commander players are definitely the most excited about this. 5 casting cost, legendary artifact. Colorless creatures you control get +2/+2. Whenever you tap a permanent for colorless, add an additional colorless, and whenever you cast a colorless spell, you gain 2 life. So there's a lot of possibilities here. Right off the bat, people are going to be looking at Basalt Monolith for infinite mana. There's already some ways to do that, but this is an entirely colorless way. The +2/+2 for your colorless creatures extends to your lands, like Mishra's Factory, Mutavault. I mean, there's a lot of upside here. This card, I think Commander players are going to have a lot of fun. Probably not going to have much use for it in Limited. We'll see how the rest of these colorless cards play out, but it is a very, very good card for Commander, and I think that's probably going to have a decent price tag on it in the future. Lithoform Engine, 4 casting cost, all sorts of text on this one. Another legendary artifact. You can pay 2 to copy a activated or triggered ability you control. You can pay 3 to copy an instant or sorcery you control, and you can pay 4 to copy a permanent spell you control. The copy becomes a token. So, I mean, Commander players are going to love this one as well. Not sure you'd actually leave it up in your pre-release pool. It is certainly the type of card that can lead to feeling awful. Keep in mind, when you pay 3 and tap it to copy an instant or sorcery spell you control, it does target. So if they, in response, counterspell that instant or sorcery, then that'll put that card into the graveyard, and then this ability will have no legal target on resolution, so it'll get countered. So that's going to feel pretty bad, and I think mostly we'll relegate this to the Commander tables, and even then, I mean, you're moving all in. It is definitely an easier thing to throw a Narset's Reversal or a Fork or something at your opponent's stuff. It's a little less of a blowout than moving all in on a single spell. Myriad Construction, 4 casting costs 4/4. Totally reasonable, aggressive creature there. Also has the ability to hold down the fort and stabilize against those early draws if you've fallen behind. But if it was kicked, it enters with a +1/+1 counter for each non-basic land your opponent controls. And then on top of that, whenever it becomes a target of a spell or ability, or a target of a spell, sacrifice it and create a number of 1/1 constructs equal to its power. So very interesting card. You're going to potentially be able to pay 7 to get a pretty beefy guy in some of these games where people are going to be playing those lands that double as spells. So yeah, this guy's kind of a hangerback walker. When he dies, you're going to be getting a bunch of 1/1s that can be pretty difficult to deal with. Relic Amulet, 2 mana, you can pay 2 and remove all the counters on it to deal that much damage to a creature, and whenever you play an instant sorcery or wizard spell, you put a charge counter on it. I don't really know what to make of that. It's going to be probably super late pick in draft, I'm guessing. Like, you'll be able to pick this up. But if it's a finely tuned deck, this might actually be a really dangerous card. Tough to say. I mean, it doesn't do anything on its own. Over time, it is creature removal, but it's not the cheapest creature removal. So, I don't know. This one's probably got its applications more in draft than anything. And maybe, I mean, you don't really need this effect in Commander for the most part. Relic Axe, 2 casting costs. Of course, it does equip to the creature when it enters the battlefield, and the equipped creature gets +1/+1, or if it's a warrior, +2/+1. I mean, that's actually going to be pretty good in the aggressive warrior decks here. +2 for 2 damage. You can equip it for 2, and this one seems fine. I mean, it's not Bone Splitter, but it's better than Bone Splitter the first time you play it. Right? You're going to pay 2, and you're going to get +2/+1 on a warrior instead of just +2/+0. So, I mean, that one seems like it's going to be pretty good for your pre-release pool. Relic Golem, 3 casting costs, 6/6. You got to be like, what is going on there? That's obviously, those stats are way too good as is. So it's got to have a drawback, which is it can't attack or block unless an opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard. And then you can also pay 2 and tap it to mill target player. So, I mean, that might be fine. I mean, that's a strong card for mill. There seems to be enough support for mill to be a valid strategy here, and the interesting part of this is, like, do you just keep milling, or do you just start smashing face with a 6/6? It probably is going to be more along the lines of holding it back and just continuing to mill. If you're doing like 4 cards a turn with your mill strategy, they're drawing a card for turn. That's 5 cards a turn. They are starting with 33 cards in their library in all likelihood. So you're talking like 6 turns to mill them out, 5 to 6 turns, which is a clock. And if you've got any of the rare support for that, any like big bursts of card mill, then that could be even faster. So yeah, I mean, I'll probably, if I end up drafting this set a lot, which I don't see happening, I probably would try and force mill every once in a while. Relic Vial, 3 casting costs. You can pay 2 and sack it to draw a card. And as long as you have a cleric, Relic Vial has whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses a life and you gain a life. So again, clerics seem like they're going to be a pretty treacherous, I was going to say tribe, which is, I guess, technically correct. It's a pretty treacherous creature type in this set. A lot of little life loss here and there, and also ways of taking advantage of that. Also, paying 2 to sack a creature to draw a card is a totally reasonable response to removal, kind of getting a 2-for-1. Playing this, I mean, outside of clerics, probably not. Probably not. Yeah, I mean, this will probably be part of some combos in Commander. Seaside Colossus, 7 casting costs, 7/5, but it does get reduced for your party, so potentially 3 casting cost. It is also a warrior to keep that party going, even if your smaller warrior dies. And yeah, there's a totally reasonable chance you're going to sleeve this one up. If you're going to be able to assemble a whole party, then it could be a tremendous bargain. But if you've got like 2 of the 4, pretty solidly, paying 5 for this is totally acceptable. Skyclave Relic, 3 casting cost, indestructible, and it taps for 1 of any color mana. It is nice when you commit to a mana rock that you don't just get blown out by some type of removal. Sorry about that, guys. And you can also pay a kicker of 3, and if you do, when it was kicked, you create 2 tap tokens that are copies of Skyclave Relic. So basically, you're able to get 3 mana for a mana rock that can tap for anything that's also indestructible, or you can pay 6 mana to get copies, and then you're actually just getting 3 mana right back. So I expect this one will be a fan favorite in Commander, and I haven't actually seen the tokens for this set. I wonder if there's actually Skyclave Relic tokens. Probably not. That would be very confusing for people, I think. Skyclave Sentinel. Yeah, I actually didn't see the tokens. That's so wild. Skyclave Sentinel, 3 for a 2/3 flyer, but it has Defender. If it was kicked, it enters with 2 +1/+1 counters, and as long as it has any +1/+1 counters on it, then you can ignore that Defender. So basically for 7 mana, you're going to get a 4/5 flyer, but you are going to be able to play this as a 2/3, and then later on, if you have the ability to toss a +1/+1 counter on there, you're going to be swinging in the air with a 3/4, which is really healthy stats for a flyer. 3/4 is going to beat most of the things that you'll encounter in the air, your 2/2s, your 3/3s. Really, when you get to the point where they've got 4/4s, now you might have a problem. But even still, you're potentially going to win that race because you hit them for a few times for 3 first. So maybe they just stare at each other at that point. Spare Supplies, 2 casting cost artifact, not an equipment, though it does look like it. Enters the battlefield tapped. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card, and then you can pay 2 and tap it to draw a card. So kind of a clue for 2 that also draws a card with it when it enters the battlefield. It's a common. At Colorless, you're going to draw 4 cards. Maybe Tron is going to be okay with this. It is possible as like a little colorless card drawing. That wouldn't be a shocking thing for Pauper. But yeah, that's about it off the top of my head. I mean, I feel like Ichor Wellspring is probably going to be better in so many Pauper decks where you're able to sacrifice it to get the card instead of having to pay 2 and sacrifice it. But I wouldn't be surprised if this saw some play in Pauper or people experiment with it in Tron to get that extra card drawing. It does have that ETB draw a card, which is so important for that deck. Stonework Pack Beast, 2 casting costs, 2/1. It's also going to help out with your party, and it filters your mana. That's probably the best version of this card that we've seen. There's been several different versions of this. I've used them without embarrassment in like Modern Horizons even, and that was a very high power format. Just fixing the mana occasionally, you're going to be very happy to filter your mana if you're a 2-color deck, or if you did end up splashing a bomb where you just have like 1 red card that's absolutely going to win the game for you if you draw it. It's nice to be able to have ways of casting it that aren't just playing like multiple mountains. Usually in those type of cases, I like to play like a single mountain and then have a bunch of ways that can also give me whatever other color mana I need. You just don't want to be making your mana base that much worse for a splash. Utility Knife, 1 casting cost. Look at this thing. Waiting for the Secret Lair Victorinox edition for a full-blown marketing campaign with the Swiss Army knives. 1 casting cost equipment. When it enters the battlefield, attach it to a creature you control. They get +1/+1, and you can pay 3 to bounce it around. I think there's going to be some decks that really care about equipment a lot, and in those decks, maybe they'll want as much of it as they can get. The 3 casting cost is a lot to give the creature +1/+1. The 1's nice. I mean, I could definitely see myself playing this card, but I'm probably going to feel bad when the original creature dies and I have to eventually pay 3 to toss it on to something else. But we'll see. We'll see. I mean, I think equipment, you don't want too much of it. That's one thing that you can definitely make a mistake of. Unless you have some type of thing that really rewards having a bunch of equipment. There are a couple of cards in the set that are really on that flavor. They don't do anything on their own. If you draw an opening hand with some lands and 2 pieces of equipment and 1 creature, I mean, that is super dicey. Like, they can kill the 1 creature and you're just sitting there with a couple of utility knives. That is not going to have much utility. Base Camp enters the battlefield tapped, taps for a colorless, and adds 1 mana of any color to cast a cleric, warrior, rogue, or wizard, or to activate an ability on one of those creatures. Probably fine. I mean, entering the battlefield tapped is a drawback for sure. You don't want to dismiss that, but it's mana fixing. I mean, tap for colorless is a worst case scenario. I mean, it's probably fine if you're able to have a bunch of different, or if you really require mana fixing, this may actually help you out a lot. Branchloft Pathway. Now we're into the rare cycle here, so either green or white or black. It's the whole cycle. Dimir, Gruul, all of them. We've got Crawling Barrens. breaking up the cycle there. This all the lands alphabetically now. So Crawling Barrens, one of the more interesting man lands that we've seen. You pay 4 to put 2 counters on it, and then if you want, you can have it become a 0/0 elemental. So if you are pumping this up during your opponent's end step, you actually don't have to open up a window for removal during their end step. You can just turn it into a bigger creature and then untap, make a land drop, maybe get some counter magic up, maybe give your Mother of Runes a chance to untap if somehow a deck ends up playing this. And yeah, I think this card's one of the ones that I'd probably be pretty happy to have in my pool. Doesn't come into play tapped. If you're in a solid 2 colors and you can afford to have a little bit of colorless in there without really compromising your mana curve, I mean, this is going to potentially be a real game breaker over time. But when you're paying 4 mana during the end step or 8 mana and just like making this guy massive, I mean, that is pretty scary. And then eventually you're just activating it during your main phase and sending it into combat, likely to be chump blocked, is probably how that's going to go. You're probably going to get to the point where this thing's gigantic, and then you just start making it even bigger and turning it sideways and start picking off their creatures one at a time. Maybe they try and throw a bunch of stuff in front of it, but that gets super risky. That really opens you up against removal, where you try and triple block this 8/8, and then that ends the game in a hurry when you take out one of those blockers and the other ones die to combat. More of these 2-color lands. Is it here? Riverglide Pathway. Throne of Makindi taps for a colorless. You can pay 1 and tap it to put a charge counter on it, and you can also tap it and remove a charge counter to add 2 mana of any one color, only for kicked spells. So if you're super kicker heavy, possibly going to play this. Don't know. Doesn't seem super good to me. There's just better mana fixing for constructed, and it feels like not really great for limited, but I guess if you have a ton of kickers, maybe you're going to be happy with the mana fixing on that. And we are all the way back around to all of our colorless creatures. So that's it. We made it through every single card from the boosters for Zendikar Rising. There's a few cards that came out in the Commander decks. Those will be out next weekend. It's a handful of cards. I think it's like 8, and they're fine. Maybe I'll do if you guys want to see a video on those handful of cards, let me know, and I'll make that happen as well. But this is pre-release weekend. Wanted to make sure we got these all done, and hopefully you guys have a great pre-release weekend. We've only got a handful of booster boxes left here. Sadly, we did not get a ton. Everything is allocated, but looks like a really sweet set, and hope you guys have fun with it. That is all for this one, but don't worry, there is a lot more. You can check out our older videos, and we're always putting out new videos from ELD's Time Vault Games in Bellingham, Massachusetts. If you want to help the channel, of course, you can like, subscribe, share, tap that notification bell so you can know the next time our new videos come out. Thanks for watching.